We who believe in freedom cannot rest. Texas is right next door, and I am not able to rest. Because when we don't control our reproductive lives, we don't control much of our lives at all. Bernice Reagan Johnson of Sweet Honey in the Rock wrote the words to that song in 1983 in honor of Ella Baker, the civil rights activist. The lyrics continue, struggling myself don't mean a whole lot. I've come to realize that teaching others to stand up and fight is the only way my struggle survives. There were many young women among the hundreds of people marching in Tulsa's 4th annual Women's March yesterday. There were high school students proudly holding their signs for reproductive justice. There were 650 marches across the country because we are worried that the current Supreme Court could end the freedoms we won in 1973 with Roe v. Wade. 3 members of All Souls spoke yesterday: Simi Burns, Nancy Coriel, president of the Roe Fund, and Heather Palacios, representing Planned Parenthood. It was a beautiful day. We are not resting, and there is a reason why. We are working. We are working to welcome the reproductive refugees who are crossing into the state of Oklahoma for health care because of recent legislation passed in Texas, Senate Bill 8, which prohibits a woman's right to an abortion after 6 weeks before she even knows she's pregnant. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. I'm a woman who speaks in a voice, and I must be heard. At times, I can be quite difficult. I'll bow to no man's word. This morning, I am speaking because I have come to understand that abortion care is a need. It's more than a choice. And I've learned this thanks to the work of Black women, primarily, and other women of color. And by work, I mean because of the reading and thinking and writing and organizing of these Black American women. It hurts. It hurts to say so because I, like many of you, were part of it, the pro-choice movement. But the pro-choice movement missed the mark in some crucial ways. Specifically, many white activists missed the mark because choice implies a marketplace of options in which women's rights to determine what happens to their bodies is legally protected. But hundreds and hundreds of years of systemic racism in our country mean that women's bodies have not been protected equally. The authors of Undivided Rights, Women of Color Organizing for Reproductive Justice, make the mistakes of the choice movement very, very clear. Native American activist Justine Smith writes that a woman who decides to have an abortion because she can't afford to raise her child does not experience her decision as a choice. In the Native context, where women often find the only contraceptives available to them are dangerous, and they live in communities where unemployment runs as high as 80%, and life expectancy can be as low as 47 years. Choice is meaningless. Abortion care is a need, much more than a choice. The authors assert that no one knows this better than the descendant of a slave whose reproductive life was dominated by reproductive tyranny. Reproductive tyranny includes rape, forced sterilizations, forced marriages, forced breakups of families, and state welfare policies that determine the number of children a woman will bear. Now, we know women slaves had no legal claims on their children, but we never hear that rather than have their children taken away from them, they used their knowledge of plant-based contraception and abortion to resist. In an essay written in 1856, a Dr. E.M. Pendleton wrote that he believed they are possessed of a secret by which they destroy the fetus at an early age. The women were so successful that entire plantations of slaves failed to have children, frustrating the owners' plans for profit. The authors write in a chapter called African American Women Seed a Movement. Reproductive health care, including abortion care, is much more than a choice. It is a need, and it is a matter of justice. Reproductive health and abortion care are actually part of a decades-long global movement for more justice for more women. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights and many international treaties protect women's reproductive rights. But conservative religious movements in this country, primarily white, Catholic, and evangelical, prevent the United States from signing on to these international treaties. For example, the Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. It's really important to understand that it is women of color who are insisting on what they call undivided rights, and what we can begin calling undivided rights, meaning that they have refused over the last 50 years to divide civil rights from human rights, or human rights from health rights, or health rights from reproductive rights, transforming our fight for justice. The shift from choice to justice means the reproductive justice movement is as much a fight to allow women to have and keep our children as it is a fight to give us the freedoms and care we need to not have children. It is as much a fight to allow women to have and keep our children as it is a fight to give us the freedoms and care we need to not have our children. Racial justice is at the core of reproductive justice. And so reproductive justice is also a fight against coercive sterilization and invasive long-term birth control technologies, two of the methods frequently employed by racially motivated family planning organizations. And this is painful history also, but important to understand that the history of family planning in our country includes the support of birth control from eugenicists, including the American Birth Control League, which made the United States of America the first country to permit mass sterilization to, quote, purify the race. By the mid-1930s, 20,000, mostly African American and Native American women, had been sterilized against their wills, and eugenics laws had been passed in over 20 states. In the 50s and 60s, the idea of population control, remember that? Once again targeted poor women of color worldwide, claiming that controlling the fertility of poor women, especially in the developing world, was necessary to avert poverty, prevent the spread of communism, and increase the ability of the United States to govern world affairs. Did you know that the federal government had a population control policy that resulted in the sterilization of over 1/3 of all women of childbearing age in Puerto Rico? In the 1970s, medical personnel systemically coerced Mexican American women into submitting to sterilization at LA County USC Medical Center. And very recently, there were reports of coerced sterilizations of immigrant women held by ICE at the Irwin County Detention Center in Georgia. Too many governmental and private population control agencies have been heavily influenced by racist policies, preventing women of color from wholeheartedly joining the pro-choice movement. Just as so many of we white people thought we had won the fight against racism in the late 20th century and discovered in the 21st century that we were wrong, we are discovering now that we have not won the fight for women's autonomy and self-determination, partly because mainstream movements for choice did not recognize our own racism. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. As a founder and longtime leader of the movement, Loretta Ross says, our ability to control what happens to our bodies is constantly challenged by poverty, racism, environmental degradation, sexism, homophobia, and injustice in the United States. It's important that we understand the shift from choice to justice, because reproductive justice is a theory, it is a practice, and it is also a strategy which protects women's rights to abortion and procreation and parenting and sexual pleasure. When we allow our consciousness to be transformed from choice to justice, our strategies will change, and many others will get involved, including men. Yes. Just as I believe that we can have white skin and intentionally become anti-racists, so I believe men can intentionally become feminists and fierce advocates for reproductive freedoms and justice. Thank you. When we allow our consciousness to be transformed from choice to justice, we will also willingly and willfully partner with gay and lesbian and transgender people who are also working to detach biology from destiny. We will work together with people who understand that female bodies don't exist just to bear children. And sexual identity exists beyond motherhood. When we allow our consciousness to be transformed from choice to justice, we will work together for a world in which all people have access to healthy food and housing, health and childcare, good jobs and good schools, safe and effective contraception, and then abortions will be safe and uncontroversial too. As the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King said, science gives man knowledge, which is power. Religion gives man wisdom, which is control. Science deals mainly with facts. Religion deals mainly with values. The two are not rivals. Religion deals mainly with values, and our tradition teaches us to respect the rights of individual women to self-determination. So when a woman chooses abortion, my religious values teach me to respect that woman's conscience. There is no mention of abortion in either the Hebrew or the Christian scriptures. So as some of the signs in the march said yesterday, get your theology off my biology. And if you believe in a God whose greatest name of all is love, then you will not cast the first stone. And instead, you will offer compassion to the woman standing before you. No woman should be made to feel ashamed for having an abortion. And the pertinent question is not when a fetus becomes a person, but when does a woman become not a person? And the answer to that second question is never. If you revere all life, then you will revere and respect the life and the logic of the woman who is making her decision. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. And I believe there are men who care as much about reproductive justice as women do, and that there are men who care as much about women's freedoms as their own. And Marlin is one of those men. So I'm thrilled he's going to speak this morning, that we are speaking in tandem because we must, moving forward, speak together. Thank you, Marlin.
Well, that is a hard act to follow. Barbara is always a hard act to follow, but that message so informed and impassioned and important. I wouldn't even try to get up here and speak after that if I didn't also agree with Barbara that men have a role to play in reproductive justice. I'm going to say something that might be controversial. Reproductive rights is not a women's issue. It's a human rights issue. And as Barbara just explained so well, women of color in this country have shown us that reproductive justice crosses almost every other form of injustice and oppression that exists in our society today. It's important that you understand a little bit about me and my history, and particularly the woman who shaped my understanding of women more than anybody else. I was raised by one of the most amazing women that I've ever known. My mom raised me from the time I was 10 years old as a single mother. You should also know that for me, while growing up, reproduction was an everyday thing. Some of my earliest memories are walking down the hall into the living room of my home and seeing a half dozen pregnant women and their husbands lying on the floor doing breathing exercises. You see, my mom was a Lamaze instructor starting in the late 60s when natural childbirth was in its infancy in the modern middle class of the United States. I was barely out of diapers when my mom became the national chairwoman for trainers for Lamaze. And it was in that role that my mom became one of the leading advocates fighting to get husbands to be able to be in the delivery room for the birth of their children. Just the other day, she told me that the resistance to having men in the delivery room included doctors and hospitals trying to create laws that required men to go through invasive medical examinations in order to qualify to be in the delivery room. It was a blatant attempt to block men from being present when their children were born. My mom and other women in this movement were not going to have it. And they told the doctors where they could shove their invasive procedures that were clearly meant as coercive deterrence. Having partners in the delivery room today may seem normal, but it wasn't long ago that childbirth was an experience that few American fathers or second spouses were a part of. Think about it. As many women were having the most intense, scary, and amazing experience of their lives, they were not able to share it with the person they love. The reason that I was able to be there when my son was born was because women, like my mom, advocated for our right to be there. My children's birth are among the absolutely most incredible and moving experiences of my life, and one of the most bonding experiences between me and my wife. Most men's role in childbirth in this country prior to a few decades ago was to pace back and forth in a smoke-filled waiting room. You remember that? I see some heads nodding from some of the older men. Today, partners of all genders train with their spouses before childbirth. They work with them through the labor experience, and depending on the physician today, they might even deliver their own baby. My mom went on to earn her master's in health professionals education. She became a medical writer. She co-published a booklet on physicians' guidelines so that doctors could understand how women and their partners can assist in the process of childbirth. Back then, doctors had no idea why these women were breathing like this, and what the heck does her partner have to be in the room for? She became a certified sex educator when I was in middle school and did sex therapy with couples along with a male OBGYN. If you've seen the show Sex Education on Netflix, that was me growing up with a sex educator and sex counselor as a mother. She even holds a patent on a mirror device that she invented that allows women during a gynecological exam to participate and to view what the doctor is looking at. In other words, my mom and other women have been advocating for reproductive rights, including the reproductive rights of men, for decades. And I see it as an absolute responsibility to be an advocate for women's and everyone's reproductive rights. But it's more than that. Despite having an outstanding sex education, when I was a senior in high school, I played a decisive role in getting a woman pregnant. Without me knowing it, the woman terminated the pregnancy. It wasn't until 6 months later that she sent me a letter and explained why she'd become so distant and explaining what had happened. She said she didn't want to disrupt and complicate my life since I was still in high school. And she explained that she was not in a position to take care of a child or even to carry a pregnancy to term. As you can imagine, I went through a lot of different emotions and thoughts. But one thing is crystal clear to me. Her ability to safely and affordably terminate her pregnancy played a very important role, not only in her future, but very much in my own. Now, I could go on and on about key, courageous decisions that women in my life have made that have made my life possible. So when I say that ending reproductive tyranny is not just a women's issue, I'm linking women's rights and freedoms to my own rights and freedoms. And when women do not have control of their own bodies, then men suffer too. That being said, even if men didn't suffer, it would still be the right thing to do. But the point is, we are all interconnected, and so is our freedom. Women's rights are human rights, and when anyone is oppressed, we are all oppressed. All of our liberation is bound up together. This is not just a political statement, it's a theological statement. We are part of an interconnected web of all life. We are one family. We may be divided up into nations and tribes and religions and cultures, but beneath it all, we are one. What happens to any one of us affects all of us. That's why men are not just allies in the struggle for reproductive justice, we are stakeholders. Our own sexual health and bodily autonomy and ability to form and care for our families are also impacted in many ways by the same systems of reproductive oppression. Fair pay is not a women's issue. Childcare is not a women's issue. Sexual violence is not a women's issue. And family planning is not a woman's issue. These issues impact all of us and our families and our freedom and our pursuit of happiness. That's why I'm dedicated to promoting broader, more equitable definitions of masculinity. I'm all about breaking down the gender straitjackets that keep people stuck in stereotypes that limit our freedom and our happiness. Men come in many forms and have many labels, including queer, femme, non-conforming, father, partner, jock, nerd, trans, and many more. So I invite you to join me in pledging to use your voice and actions toward the goal of promoting a healthier masculinity that lifts up all people. That includes doing our part to create a world without gender-based violence, a world with full access to sexual and reproductive health and justice. Here are 6 things that you can do. I've seen these 6 written in different places recently. Challenge negative stereotypes and representations of men and masculinity. Call out sexism and rape culture when you see it. Always ask for consent before sexual activity and always respect the answer. Challenge yourself and interrogate your own personal privileges and be an outspoken champion for reproductive justice. And if you identify as male or a man, come join All Souls Men's Group, which meets once a month. In these times that seem so good at dividing us one from the other, let us hold on to one another as if our lives depended on it, because in so many ways they do. I love you. Amen. Thank you for joining us. For 100 years, All Souls in Tulsa has been a beacon of this free faith. We offer our services and programs freely online for all those who are interested. You can help us to do this by making a one-time gift today or a reoccurring pledge. We really appreciate you joining us and being a part of helping us make All Souls in Tulsa what it is. Thank you.
Building bridges between our divisions. I reach out to you, will you reach out to me? With all of our voices and all of our visions, friends, we could make such sweet harmony.